Hey, what's up you guys, the Curious Owl here, and today I'm going to be giving you my July wrap-up. So today is actually July 25th, so I have a little bit less than a week before the month ends, so I'm not going to be sharing my stats or anything in this video, but in the description below I will have an accurate count of everything by the time this video goes out, and then I will also update it at the very end of the month with what are the books that I did finish after this video has gone out, and the most accurate information as far as my stats for page count, minute count, books I finished, types of books, things of that nature. That'll all be in the description below by the time this video goes out, and then when the month ends I will have everything put in there for the most accurate information. So just be sure that when you go see this video for the first time, when it first comes out, to check the description, and then in a few days come back and see what the update was, because there is a possibility I will at least finish maybe one more book, maybe two, maybe three, depending on how the month goes, because I still have an audiobook to finish, I have an ebook that I just started, and I may get to another ebook depending on how the next few days go. But I will at least very least go over the books I did so far complete this month, which was pretty interesting to say the least. I feel like I had a fairly good month because most of the books I read were 3 stars and up. So the first book I completed this month was an audiobook, and that was for The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. This is a book that basically it talks about the mass incarceration problem that we have in the United States, where several Black people are being thrown into prison for what seems very minuscule things, or they're being thrown in prison for things that white people could be charged with at the same time, but they get longer sentences or more harsher sentences than white people do, and how a lot of this has stemmed from the systemic racism we have in the United States against Black people and other people of color, and specifically how the war on drugs back in the 1980s led to a massive explosion of Black people being thrown into prison because of several different things that happened over the course of time during the war on drugs in terms of the way that police forces were handled, things of that nature. I found it to be incredibly interesting because I had not really known much about the war on drugs. I was born in 1997, so most of that is not information I was ever really taught or knew about very much. I knew that the 80s was the time of the war on drugs when Ronald Reagan was president, but I didn't really know much about what exactly happened and what exactly led from those things. So it was very eye-opening for me, and truthfully was actually a book that made me very angry, because I read this book specifically to understand the history of some of the systemic racism that we have in the US, as since I'm a white woman I need to educate myself on a lot of these things to understand more why things like the Black Lives Matter movement have happened. I'm a huge supporter of the Black Lives Matter movement because I understand that we have such a systemic racist community in the United States, and how cops are actually fairly bad in a lot of ways in the way that they handle people of color in general. That you can see all kinds of videos go around on Twitter, Facebook, any social media of, cops actually going out and brutalizing people of color for what seems like minuscule things, or how Black people get the cops called on them by white people because they're doing things that are suspicious when they're not literally doing anything. They might be just taking a walk in the park, whatever it is. And so this book made me really angry to understand where a lot of that comes from, because a lot of the issues we have today in terms of why the police are so brutal towards people of color stems from the war on drugs. So if you want to know more about why these things are happening, and you want to know why a group like the Black Lives Matter movement really started in a lot of ways, I highly suggest going and reading this book because it is incredibly important. The version I actually listened to was a recent adaptation of it, where the preface was actually written by the author to explain how things like Trump's inauguration has really skyrocketed the amount of racist things, and how race-based hate crimes have basically, exploded over the last several years since Trump's inauguration. The book itself was written back when Obama was, elected president, but the preface was updated recently to explain a lot of how the information still is the same in the book, but it kind of goes into a little bit more in depth about how especially Trump's inauguration had basically changed the way that our racist ideologies and things of that nature have kind of exploded over the last few years. So the second book I actually listened to was another audiobook, another one focusing on information about the Black Lives Matter movement and understanding more about race, and that is So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijeoma, I believe. Ijeoma Oluo, and I gave this one a 5 out of 5 stars as well because I found it to be so captivating in so many ways. So similarly to how the new Jim Crow focuses on race and how systemic racism plays in our country, So You Want to Talk About Race does go into that, but it kind of goes in a more general area. It does actually reference a lot to the new Jim Crow in terms of talking about mass incarceration, but it goes more into things about like hair culture and how Black people have suffered in terms of trying to obtain things like mortgages and things like that. It's basically a book that goes more in general about being a Black person in the United States and some of the issues they face and what it takes for somebody that wants to talk about race, how they should go about it, how they should, handle people that are being kind of difficult when it comes to talking about race, and how they want to maybe overrun the conversation about it as opposed to leading to change kind of thing. It's kind of not necessarily a how-to book, but it is a book that does discuss different aspects about race in the United States, and then also goes into how you can start having discussions about race, especially if you want to talk about race with people that are Black or people that are white or, various different things. And both books in general do also talk about other people of color in terms of, the statistics and things about like how they perceive different communities as well. So this is also a really great resource. And if you just want to kind of go in general with looking at race and understanding some of the issues that are in our country because of race, and then the new Jim Crow is a little bit more centered in on specifically the aspect of mass incarceration and kind of where that came from and what exactly has happened since the war on drugs in terms of things like police brutality and things of that nature. So then the first physical book I completed this month was my first draw for my huge TBR I had planned, where all these books behind me I was going to try to read, as well as books on my Kindle and other books I can find through my public library, and that was Crazy Rich Asians by Kwan. I do have a full review of this if you would like to go check it out, so I'm not going to go too much into it, but I will say this was an amazing book. I give it a 5 out of 5 stars. Really taught me a lot about exactly like the idea of satire and gave me kind of a different perspective of different groups of people, specifically Singaporean wealth culture, which I don't know necessarily how accurate it is. I go into a bit of a discussion about it in the review, but I thought it was hilarious. I thought it was great, and I felt so much responsibility to protect Rachel and Nick, who are the main characters in the story, that like I couldn't leave this book without feeling some type of way about them. And I immediately had to get China Rich Girlfriend, the second book, because I really want to know where the story goes based on the synopsis of China Rich Girlfriend. So it's going to be very interesting to see how the rest of the story plays out. But I highly recommend it if you guys have not read it as of yet, to definitely pick it up, because especially if you're someone who likes reality TV, this is like reality TV in a book, and it is great. And I hate reality TV. Like, I don't watch the Kardashians, I don't watch like Real Housewives or anything like that, because I despise them. I think that they're absolute trashy shows. But I couldn't help but love this one because, I don't know, just something about it like made me super giddy. Like, I understand now why people like reality TV, so maybe I'll try it. We'll see. The next book I completed was Children of Blood and Bone by Toni Adeyemi. This is a book I've been highly anticipating for the last couple of years and just never got around to reading it, and then I drew it in my TBR and was so freaking excited, and I really enjoyed this. I did give this one a 4 out of 5 stars because I did have some issues with some of the writing, and I felt like the overall end was kind of disappointing in some ways. I just felt like there were some characters that had died that I felt like didn't have to, and I also kind of don't really know where the story is going to go from here. I feel like this could have been maybe a standalone, which I think was the original intent, was for it to be a standalone. But I don't know, the ending just didn't sit well with me in a lot of ways, but I did really enjoy the story. I loved learning about Orisha and about the Magi and following all these characters through this story. I also didn't necessarily care for the romance that was involved between Zelly and another character. I didn't get it. I didn't understand it. I felt like it was a little insta-lovey. I don't know. It didn't sit right with me. It wasn't a perfect book by any means, but I really did enjoy the time I read it, and I am looking forward to reading Children of Virtue and Vengeance, I think is the name of it. Then the next book I completed was a little bit more of a heavy hit for me, and that was Allegedly by Tiffany D. Jackson. This was a story that goes into the story about a girl named Mary who, when she was 9 years old, was accused of murdering a 3-month-old white baby and basically spent a lot of her life in prison. The story picks up when she's been living in this group home for about 3 months and she's trying to navigate her life. She's going to go back to school to get the SAT done so she can hopefully go to college, and she's dealing with a lot of different things, and one of those things is that she finds out she's pregnant, and unfortunately for her, because she's still considered a ward of the state, her child is then also considered a ward of the state, and because of her past in particular, the state basically says that she is not going to be able to take care of her baby unless somehow she's able to clear her name. So the story is really about her coming to terms with what really happened with the murder of this 3-month-old baby and trying to get some justice for not just this baby but herself, and that way so she can actually take care of her unborn child when it does end up becoming born. It's a very hard-hitting story. I did find myself many times like actually feeling physically sick about some of the things that had happened, especially when we find out what exactly did happen the night that this baby was killed, and I just felt very, I don't know, like I can't quite put my thoughts into words of how I felt with this. It just was heart-wrenching. It was really kind of disorienting in a lot of ways. I couldn't give it a 5 out of 5 stars though. I gave it a 4 because I feel like the writing style in a lot of ways jarred me out of the story. There were just some ways that, like, one character in particular, like there was a dialect written for her that I felt like just drew me out of the story, and it's not necessarily that it was bad, it just kind of like shocked me because everybody else talks almost the exact same way for the most part. One character who's Latina does speak a little bit differently, but that wasn't really so much jarring. There was just a black character that I don't even know where the accent comes from that was used, that I feel like it just pulled me out of the story so much. Like it was just kind of unnecessary, and I don't know, it just didn't sit right with me. But I think regardless, the story itself is beautifully written. I think it is something that isn't really talked about a lot, is like, you know, what happens when a kid will do anything to protect their family kind of thing. And I don't want to say much more than that because otherwise it would spoil it, but that's kind of the general idea of the story. And the last book I completed by the time that I'm recording this video is A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Brigid Kemmerer. Now, this one was my most disappointing one so far this month because I think that the way that the book was marketed, I have a whole review that I will be coming out with here during this week that you guys will be able to see, but in general, I think that the way that this book was marketed was totally wrong for this book because it set my expectations up for this book being a retelling, like a full-on carbon copy almost of Beauty and the Beast. And I feel like it was really more of a reimagining, like how Cinder by Marissa Meyer was a reimagining of Cinderella. There were so many elements that I could pick out word for word, you know, exact scenes from Beauty and the Beast, but the whole story of A Curse So Dark and Lonely is completely different. There are so many different elements playing into the story that take Beauty and the Beast way steps farther. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars because I felt like there were some really disappointing aspects. There was a whole character that I felt like deserved a perspective that we didn't get from until the very end of the book that I think we could have really done with, because it was so important for me to see how he was viewing things, because there wasn't necessarily a love triangle going on, but there was some kind of feeling happening that I feel like I would have liked to have known more from his side. And then the writing style for Harper I felt was too close to what Ren was, that it kind of jarred me in a lot of ways. I felt like Harper's writing style in terms of like the way the story was written was way too close in terms of the tone and even sometimes the dialect that Ren had. I felt like it was just way too similar to where that if I didn't really have the chapter headings with the character that have the perspective from, I wouldn't have known who was who until a name popped up that wasn't their own. So it was just kind of a bizarre thing, but it was good. It was really interesting. I liked also the fact that the story, like I said, took a whole new element into the fantasy world that was not expected, but it took me like 40% to get into the book, and I kind of felt like that was dragging a lot because of the writing style, and I felt like that was when a lot of the other elements of the story kicked in that I was like really excited to see. And I liked it enough though to where I want to read A Heart So Fierce and Broken, but I don't know when that's going to happen. So at this point, that is all the books that I have read at this point. Like I said, in the description below, I will be leaving all of the books I complete by the time that I finish the month of July. So you will get an accurate reading of what exactly I've done with all the other books I finished, as well as the most accurate page count, minute count, things of that nature for the month. I will, though, when this video does initially go out, I will leave everything that I have said in this video and the stats for that point in the description for you guys, and then I will just make sure to go and update it by August 1st. So let me know what you guys have read down in the comments below. If you guys did enjoy this video, please do give it a big thumbs up, and if you're not already and you'd like to be, hit that button down below and subscribe to become an owlet in our flock, and I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye guys!